Hello, future human. This is the COVID one, Life in a Pandemic. The most anticipated video of the year 2200. Hold on to your seats, grab that popcorn or whatever you eat in the future. I wonder if we're just injecting like liquid food into our system at that point. Liquid nutrients! I mean, I guess it does save on the time that goes into like getting food, preparing food, but my taste buds would be really lonely. Isn't there a Japanese word for that? Kuchi sabishi. When you're not hungry, but you eat because your mouth is lonely. That explains so much of my life. Obviously, it varied depending on what was happening in your life during COVID. For some people, it was a year of isolation. For other people, it was extremely devastating with actual loss. And for some, it was like COVID didn't even exist. Some people think it still doesn't exist. After 113 million cases and 2.5 million deaths worldwide. I've been one of those people that during this pandemic has lived in a very disconnected, isolated way. I know there's a lot of people that have lived the same. I've spent majority of my time staying at home, seeing one other human being. I've always considered myself a bit emotionally detached. It's not to say that I don't care about the people in my life, I do, it's just I have a strange way of showing it. But I was also very fortunate to have grown up with a lot of people around me. Sometimes I think it's like a cultural thing. Growing up in Pakistan is very different from growing up over here. And being in America now, I've learned to live with the fact that I'm most likely not going to make the kind of friends here that I have back home. So I just tell myself that so long as I can go home once a year, get my fill of my people. But then COVID happened. This was hard. I remember I was teaching a filmmaking class and suddenly we found out that we weren't going back into schools for a while. A while. And we suddenly had to scramble to figure out how to get the class back on Zoom, which was a shit show. For you, future human, Zoom must just feel like the most normal thing because you've obviously probably upgraded your ways. Like we're probably teleporting at this stage. At the time, we had Donald Trump as president. Not the best look in history. Because of social media, we started watching videos that were coming out of other countries. And I remember watching those first few videos coming out of Italy where people were basically warning the rest of the world about COVID-19 and how they had not taken it seriously. And even then, so many people downplayed it. I mean, the president downplayed it. I remember seeing videos out of China and reading the news about some of the first doctors to report the novel coronavirus as something strange and new was happening. Because of the fact that the symptoms were so relatively normal, it was hard to figure out or detect what was going on early on. It was so close to the regular flu. And it varied from person to person. Not everybody exhibited the same symptoms. That's what made this whole thing really hard to figure out because everyone thinks they've had it at some point. You know, if you had a fever, like the number of times that I thought I had COVID-19 during this time, it was just symptom, 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 cough, fever, phlegm, no phlegm. It was just, and in the beginning there was like mixed information about who it affects, which age groups. There was just suddenly this influx of information coming from multiple sources and you just didn't really know where to look or think. In the very beginning, I used to just refresh Google every day and see the numbers just rising. Refresh, refresh, refresh. So much misleading information coming straight to you from your family's WhatsApp group. WhatsApp groups were the fucking worst. It was really overwhelming. It became this weird masochistic cycle where people were afraid of information but at the same time wanted to know everything. It's just, there were legitimate reasons to be afraid. Just the fact that there was no cure, no one was immune to this. And it was spreading so fast. There was a real fear. To be worried about your loved ones was absolutely legitimate. People were dying. The fear turned into this wave of paranoia. People were panic buying. The shelves were empty. People were just hoarding toilet paper. I mean, they were hoarding everything. And as a Desi person, I was kind of like, sucks to be you because you don't know about Muslim showers. I remember like we discovered these N95 masks in our apartment because of a previous tenant and they just felt like gold. We were like, oh my god, we have the legit deal. I remember I used to sanitize every single thing that came back. I'd wipe everything down. Everyone's just cautious of each other. Yeah, it felt like living in a movie. At least in the state that I live in. I mean, I hear other states just didn't give a fuck. I remember everyone started watching Contagion and drawing comparisons. We learned to wash our hands for 20 seconds. Win, if you ask me. It kind of makes you wonder, like, why did we not wash our hands every time we came home? I always joke that germaphobes are probably like, we knew it, we saw it coming, told you so. And then I remember one of the earliest reports was Tom Hanks getting it. I'm a huge Tom Hanks fan, FYI. And everyone was saying like, Hollywood gods can get it too. No one is immune! I also find it really funny how capitalism just took full advantage. It was really funny to see just how quickly there were all kinds of face masks, all kinds of hand sanitizer. They were like, a pandemic, but make it fashion. Here are all the various ways you can style yourself during a pandemic. And I was just like, okay, great. Social distancing and how it turned into social awkwardness. Not everyone was on the same page about it. A lot of relationships just got plain awkward. There were extremes on either end about how people wanted to handle themselves and their families. And while everyone was on this weird seesaw where some people were panic buying, other people didn't give a shit, things were crazy in the hospitals. If you were a doctor or a nurse or a first responder or a healthcare worker, your life it changed completely. Hospitals were just not equipped to deal with that level of patients. There were too many. And then we started learning about flattening the curve. Every state, every city, every country started becoming more vigilant. That's when severe lockdowns were put into place. Everything closed down. Some places went completely out of business. Joblessness, homelessness. A lot of us just lived on unemployment all year long. A lot of us still struggle to get jobs today. Racism towards people of color, particularly East Asians, particularly Chinese. Businesses were affected, people were assaulted. It was extremely revealing just how easy it is for us to throw other people under the bus for our own survival or as an excuse for our aggression and our frustration when we don't have answers. I think one of the most monumental things that happened in 2020 was the murder of George Floyd. Yet another example of systemic racism, specifically in the US, and it brought attention to so many other victims of systemic racism. What was important about this was the fact that in spite of a pandemic, the desperation level was so high that thousands of people across the country and in some places the world came out to protest, and rightfully so. People who were already struggling, because another thing that was extremely revealing about this pandemic was not everyone is treated fairly under dire circumstances. For lower income families, this pandemic was a wholly different experience. And in countries like the USA, many people of color come from lower income families who don't have access to many basic things like the internet. So children of people of color suffered massively in this country due to their lack of access to the internet. In the beginning, it was just hearing the news about the virus, but obviously over time it trickled down to people I actually knew getting the virus. Some people sailed through the virus like it was just a regular infection. Other people really struggled. For some people, it was like something they'd never experienced in their lives. But I know people who've lost family or friends. And then there was just a lot of awkwardness around people getting sick. Lots of questions or assumptions like, of course that person would get sick. Or other people who were extremely careful and still got sick. There was just suddenly a lot of judgment around getting sick. People were afraid of saying that they were sick, which made an already difficult situation for them extra difficult. If they already felt isolated, they felt extra isolated because of the fact that they didn't want to confide in anybody about what they were going through. On the flip side, there were way too many people that honestly didn't give a shit. Here in the USA, there were so many people that treated this like this was nothing. They didn't care about the idea of being carriers. Or a lot of young people felt like if they got it just because they could get through it, they didn't really care about who else it affected. We are so strange as human beings. And you know, sometimes I get it because the mental health toll was just so high. Finding excuses to get out every so often and actually meet another human being it just sometimes becomes so necessary. To feel like you've lost a year of your life, and so many people were losing it. I lost my mind plenty this year. I have friends who wouldn't leave their rooms in their own homes for fear of catching the virus. Honestly, I think just by being a human being, we experience so much in our lifetimes that I think it's both common and extremely normal to have mental health related issues. Considering just the amount of thoughts that go through your brain every single minute. And during a time like a pandemic where we are being inundated with information all the time, it was just hard to escape. And many people were confined at home with other humans that were extremely toxic or problematic for them. This was an unprecedented time, so we started reacting individually in unprecedented ways. Of course we were going to break down. And not everybody's resilient enough, and even if they are, it's just the level of uncertainty made it so that we started feeling uncertain with ourselves. And in some cases that garnered empathy and compassion. In other cases it garnered complete intolerance and the total opposite. We started seeing disconnect amongst people. We saw relationships fall apart. We saw marriages fall apart. In other cases we saw families come together. Oh my god, the baby boom. Because so many people were just at home, they figured, let's get pregnant, we have nothing else to do. Yeah, there's going to be a massive baby boom probably this year in 2021. Once everybody was confined to their homes, everybody decided to live on the internet. Suddenly, everyone on the internet was just alive. Which was honestly a really cool thing to see in the beginning, because everybody was creating and doing something. Even for me as a digital creator, because of the fact that so many other things were on hold for me, I was like, fuck it, I'll just create here. People started rediscovering and appreciating what it is to be at home and spend time with their families and find joy in the little things. But what ended up happening was, after some time when we realized that this pandemic was going to stick around for a while and that we were going to be homebound for a while, that's when things turned and people started taking out their frustrations online. And so we saw a rise in trolling and bullying. So much was just out of our control, and we felt this was the only way that we had any agency or control over our lives. It wasn't healthy. There were some of us that were lucky enough to stay home, binge watch Netflix. We watched all the shows, everything that we could find, we watched it all. As soon as we felt comfortable enough with COVID safety protocols, we just ordered food, and we had the luxury of being able to have access to the internet and video call our families and friends regularly and vent about how terrible our lives were. And we complained so much about being stuck at home. And on the flip side of that, there were people who had access to none of that. It's all relative, it's about perspective. But one person's pain or suffering should not minimize someone else's pain or suffering. It's a sliding scale. And I think that that's one of the learnings of this pandemic. Everyone was affected to some degree. And it's all valid because life as we knew it was altered. Whether that was losing a job, losing your peace of mind, losing your freedom, or losing an actual human being. Our ideas around the concept of loss changed. There's actually a lot of conversation now about which things from the pandemic will actually stay. A lot of companies now feel like it's a lot easier to have their employees work from home, and yet they get the same level of productivity, which means there's an overlap between work-life balance and it's all a little gray. It was fun to suddenly see all these videos of, parents in meetings with their toddlers running around in the back. I mean, I'm sure it was a challenge. I'm not a parent, and wow, homeschooling has been a legit struggle for teachers, students, and parents alike. Having said that, working from home has helped in a lot of ways. People got to stay home and whilst working got to actually spend time with their kids. There are less cars on the road, therefore there's less gas consumption, less pollution, less damage to the earth. Hopefully personal hygiene is something that stays. Jahangir Hussain says, my message. Did we learn to appreciate people while they are among us rather than make them legends while they are gone? Hassam Khan says, there will come a time when you guys will feel that your past was better, but it's the way of life evolving. Like you will appreciate one thing from the past and then two things will take over it from the present or the future. My advice, keep looking out for yourself and to be precise for your inner self. that's quite lovely. Husna Shaban says, I fear one thing. I don't want to turn into a zombie and I don't want to see any of them. Future human, are there zombies yet? Yasi Khan says, to future human, we used to go outside our houses and play with real humans together, unlike the virtual games that you guys would probably be playing in your time. It was beautiful, it was exciting, it was healthy in the best way. One of my favorite things to do as a kid was to find the steepest hill and roll down from it. Yeah, that's actually a lot of fucking fun. Difficult times, things like a pandemic, can be extremely revealing about human nature. In some ways, it made me realize that human beings can be inherently selfish, in other cases, extremely giving, and in a lot of cases, extremely fucking stupid. I don't think anybody that went into this coming out is the same. I certainly am not the same person. A lot of us felt like this was a way for us to slow down for a bit, to stop or pause for a while. Some people feel like this was a necessary reality check, like a rude awakening, like we needed to be shaken. I remember watching so many videos of people finding ways to come together online. There was that video from Italy where people were singing from their balconies. I think the biggest thing is the fact that a lot of us couldn't see our family. That was definitely hard. Today, people are getting vaccinated. I think I'm just gonna break down into tears the moment I get vaccinated. It will be an extremely emotional thing for me. When people ask me how I'm doing, I always respond with one word, and that's alive. Because I feel like having experienced a pandemic, being able to say that I'm alive is a lot. It's a lot. Looking back, I'm just kind of like, wow, those of us that are still here, we survived this thing. And that's enough. That's enough. Thanks for listening, Future Human.